Hey everyone, and welcome back. So I'm filming this just over a week since I got back from BFFI, or the British Fly Fair International, which takes place every February, or the second week of, in Stafford in the UK every year. Now, if you've not visited the show before, if you're passionate about fly fishing, fly tying, or are eager to meet up with others within the fly tying community, then this is a show for you. It is awesome. Now, it was great to see the show so busy this year, and the Saturday in particular was probably the busiest I've ever seen a Saturday in almost 15 years of tying at the event. It was absolutely crazy. As always, there were so many chats and smiling faces. I want to thank everybody that popped by the stand to say hi or to talk about trout and dry flies. And we have an amazing community, so these shows are fantastic for allowing us to meet up with guys throughout the UK and of course worldwide. I had some fantastic discussions at the show. Now, obviously, most of which focus on fly fishing, trout, and dry flies. But one area of interest that came up several times at BFFI was that of what tying gear and tools that I prefer to use. So this time around, we'll be focusing on something slightly different. We won't be tying any flies. We won't be talking about any materials. But what we will be doing is taking a look at my fly tying studio, so to speak, and the tools I opt to use, some of which I've chosen to use after almost 35 years of tying. That makes me sound so old. Now, of course, everything in this video is completely subjective. What works for me might not work for you, and vice versa. And that's totally cool. Now, I'd love to hear what tools you use. So if you think there's a better alternative or something that you prefer, then please, again, use the comment section below. It'll help me, and it'll also help the rest of the fly tying community and everybody else that watches these videos. Now, at the end of the day, we're all different. But if you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you kind of like fly tying and you like new toys. So before we dive into the toys, and if you're new to the channel, I'm Gareth Lewis, and I'm a professionally qualified fly fishing instructor, and I guided professionally for more than a decade. However, I still love to teach fly casting at various shows and fly fishing schools throughout the year, and of course, I present and demonstrate fly dressing regularly at international shows, fly dressers guild evenings, and UK club-based events. Now, for those who've been following the channel for a little while, you'll probably have concluded I like to keep things simple. But not only that, I also favour presentation over pattern. Now, that might be a weird thing for a guy who makes fly tying videos to say, but hopefully you'll agree that I also try to focus on the important things, so where to fish them, why, and the techniques that can help make your fly tying more efficient and more fun. And of course, I'm a big believer in, as long as we can provide a feeding trout with an opportunity to eat something it thinks of food, so the same size, maybe the same shape, and maybe colour, in a place where it expects to find food, then we're generally into a solid footing. Lastly, if you like this or any other of my videos, feel free to give them a like. That helps circulate the videos to the rest of the community. And of course, if you want to stay up to date, if you want to be notified on new videos, then feel free to subscribe. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at some of the toys and tools that I like to use. So, welcome to the tying desk. Now, my day job involves working from home, so I'm lucky enough actually to have two desks, so one just out of shot, and that's got my work computer and computer I use for editing photos and of course editing you. And of course the one that you can see here is the fly tying desk, or the fly tying studio. Now, thankfully this allows me to keep all of my fly tying gear set up at all times, but I don't have to pack it down each time I start work. Now, a good desk is kind of key to everything we do, and these are only fairly, cheaply priced IKEA jobs, plenty of storage, plenty of drawers, and everything I need to store away my fly tying materials and my fly tying gear. But most of all, you can see everything on the desk. I'll go through some of the bits and bobs in a moment, but generally my tools every day, nice and safe in their fly tying caddy, which I'll come on to in a moment. Now, there's not really much more to be said about desks, is there really? Do you want one with lots of drawers? Get one with lots of drawers. Do you want one with no drawers? It's just a desk, really, isn't it? Anyway, moving on. Now, probably the most important thing when doing any job, activity, hobby is to be comfortable. So I find a good quality chair to be factor number one. I'm not going to name any names. You might be able to see the name on mine behind me. As I say, I work in this room probably 10 hours plus a day. So when it comes to fly tying, I want to be comfortable from the get-go. And if I have to spend all day in this room, I want to be comfortable. So for those who have spent long nights tying big orders will tell you, well, it can get painful. During winter, I spend a lot of my time either tying, work, tying, work, tying, work, tying, and making these videos. So again, I want to be comfortable when I tie flies in the evening. A bit of an investment in a chair is probably where I'd spend my money first. So drawers, desks, and chairs out of the way. Storage is one thing, i.e. drawers, but how do you store your fly tying materials? Your capes, saddles, feathers. So I use these multi-use sandwich bags. They're zip-lockable, sealable, and they're great for storing, in this case, snowshoe rabbit feet, and they can be picked up fairly cheaply at loads of supermarkets, grocery stores. They're fantastic for storing a wide range of materials. They keep my materials sealed, which is critical if you introduce new materials that you may have collected or prepared directly from the field, rather than from a shop which has already prepared them for consumer use. Now, an important note on this one, materials from the field should be prepared before they're stored. So that before putting them next to your prized materials, they should be prepared properly after cleaning, skinning, curing, whatever, either stored in the freezer for an appropriate amount of time to kill off those nasty bugs and germs, or zapped for a couple of seconds in the microwave. Now, I'm no expert on this matter, but if you plan to introduce wild materials into your collection, please talk to somebody who's either experienced or appropriately trained before you store them. So until then, keep that new wild thing in the freezer. Many of us have heard way too many horror stories from friends who have had their beautiful capes and saddles destroyed by a bug outbreak caused by introducing an incorrectly prepared wing, dubbing, or other material to their collection without preparing it first. So Ziploc bags, they'll help reduce the risk, but they won't remove it. So before we discuss the cool toys like scissors, bobbin holders, and vices, let's discuss another critical area. So the question to ask yourself, is your environment adequately lit? Now, having a properly lit environment is another key area, and this applies to those who tie infrequently, as well as those professional or commercial tyers out there. So proper lighting doesn't just allow you to see what you're tying, but it also helps to reduce strain on these things. And let's face it, this is a hobby that can be pretty straining on our eyes from the get-go, especially if you're tying big batches of flies. So you can see a couple of warm lamps around the room, and these are just really standard lamps to light the room. For fly tying though, I have used several lamps over the years, from big daylight lamps to vice stem and desk mount options, and I prefer either the vice stem or desk mount mode, as it allows me to pack them up pretty quickly, especially if I'm heading to a show. And of course, these sorts of vice stem or desk mount vices are pretty cheap, and they can be picked up for anything from 15 to as much as you've got. They also come with multiple brightness levels, usually multiple lumen levels, so you can go from a cold light to warm light depending on what your preference is. So the one you can see here mounted to vice stem was made by Mike Johnson on Facebook. It's absolutely superb. It's lightweight, it's small, and again, if I need to run to a show, I can fold the thing down, pop it into my tying bag, and I'm away. Now, LED lights have come a long way, especially in the last 10 years. LEDs are everywhere. But again, what works for you might not work for me, and vice versa. If you can, get your hands on some first, try them out, and then I'm sure you'll find something that you like. This one is great. It's got a wire which powers via USB pack, and again, on and off, and I'm away. Great. Now, it's also got the multiple color modes that I mentioned, so I can cycle through them if I want to, nice and easy. If I need to pack it down, well, easy. Fold it down in a bag, away. So just to finish up on this point, we've talked about storage, we've talked about lighting, let's talk about magnification. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm jealous if you've got 20/20 vision. My eyes are terrible. Thankfully, I wear contact lenses, but I like to get a little bit closer in on the action. So I tend to use a pair of these cheap +3 glasses for all of my tying. It just reduces the strain on my eyes. And if I'm tying those smaller size 26 midges, well, that allows me to get in really close and perform those surgical thread wraps. Now, of course, there are other options out there as well. There are lights with magnifiers built in. There are hat clip type glasses as well, and everything up to the type that'll make you look like a welder. Again, each to their own, be comfortable first. So these glasses that I use, they can be picked up again, supermarkets, grocery stores, from anything from a few quid, £10, or for the fashion conscious among you, as much as you want to spend. Next up, let's start talking about some of the tools we're going to use. First up, scissors. Now, I'm a huge fan of the razor style scissors, and everybody from Fulham Mill to Deer Creek do a version of these razor scissors. Of course, they're generally pretty cheap. They're absolutely brilliant, allowing you to slice through thread as opposed to cutting it, which quite often might leave a small tag. If you're tying small flies, can add to unwanted buildup. Now, best of all, these scissors can actually be taken apart by taking off this little wheel, separates the blades. If you've got a whetstone, you can sharpen them, which I tend to do once, maybe twice a year. Now, of course, if you attend events like BFFI, there's usually a stand there with a chap who will professionally sharpen your scissors. And for just a few quid, you can get professionally sharpened scissors and walk out the door with them. But just remember that you've got pointy, stabby things in your pocket. You don't want to end up in one of those blue light vans. So on this note, keep your scissors sharp and clean. This is so important. It makes your work so much more easier. And of course, like any tool, if cared properly, will make these things last a lifetime. Now, what if you perhaps don't have access to either a whetstone or professional scissor sharpening service? Easy. Take a piece of kitchen foil, aluminum. Take a piece of your kitchen foil and fold it 4 times into a square or a rectangle, doesn't matter. And what you can then do is take your scissors, cut 10 times through the aluminum foil, aluminum, and this will sharpen your scissors pretty well. So again, a piece of kitchen foil, folded 4 times, cut 10 times. Now this sharpens razors moderately. Now this does sharpen your scissors fairly well, but it's pretty aggressive on the blade, so they will wear down a lot quicker, unlike a whetstone or a professional service. So if you're going to opt to do this, just be a little careful. Disclaimer, it will wear your scissors down quicker than a proper job. That said though, if you've got an old pair of scissors that you're trying to resurrect, give it a go. You'll be pretty surprised how sharp they'll be. So I do have another pair of scissors. I mean, I've just held up 4. Why have I got 4 pairs of razor scissors? There's actually more in the drawer. But I do use a standard pair of scissors, and I generally use those for cutting larger materials like deer hair and whatnot. So final line on scissors, I keep my razor scissors for the up close and personal work. Keep them clean, I keep them sharp, and I take care of them. Next up, let's talk about bobbin holders. So think about this. These are the thing that you use the most when you tie flies, bar the vise, I suppose. So ensuring these are up to the task, they're well looked after and not dropped. I do drop mine all the time. Again, taking care of your gear is so important. What bobbin holder is best? Again, it's subjective and there's simply no single answer. I've used these Renzetti ruby tip bobbin holders for over 10 years and I absolutely love them. They're super lightweight and easy to use and can take a range of different bobbin spool sizes. So I'm good to go. I tend to use the extended tube versions, which I think personally, for me, gives me a little more control when I'm tying the smaller flies. Go figure. Longer, but better for smaller flies. The arms can also be manipulated to fit maybe a thicker spool just by putting a little bit of pressure on. And of course, by doing that as well, you're increasing or decreasing the tension on the bobbin. I don't know why I've got 3. I can only use 1 at a time, but it does allow me to load different spool sizes, different threads, so I don't have to chop and change. I can just grab another spool when I need. I've also got one of these CNF bobbin holders, which are fantastic, rather technical looking, and it's also a little bit heavier and it comes in at a bit of a hysterical price. They also have this sort of foam insert which stops the thread from pulling through when you aren't using it if you turn it upside down, unlike the other ones. But I've also found this sort of splays the thread. As the thread is pulled through that foam insert, it kind of flattens and unfurls the thread. So I do need to spin the thread now and again if I want to tighten the thread up. Other than that, these are all fantastic bobbin holders. I would argue probably the best on the market. And again, if you're going to be doing a lot of fly dressing, these are brilliant tools. Hackle pliers might not seem too important to some. For example, myself, I use a lot of saddles, also those long feathers, which you can wrap 2 fists around and tie on. So that usually isn't a problem, right? Well, what hackle pliers do give us is greater and more intricate control over the hackle, which if I'm tying a batch of size 26 paradons makes the job so much easier. Again, as I mentioned earlier with the glasses, it's all about surgical precision where we need it. Of course, you can still use your fingers, but if a tool that costs £2.95 makes the job easier and more efficient, well, it's all about personal preference. I think this pair of Hackle Pliers is by a company called Griffin. Can't actually remember. I've had these for over 10 years, but if I lost this one, which is probably going to go missing making this video, then I'd buy another pair tomorrow. Actually, that reminds me. Siri, add Hackle Pliers to my shopping list.
Okay, I've added Hackle Pliers to the shopping list.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
He's good. So the grip on these is perfect, and I've never had a hackle slip once, unlike others I've used over the years, which you have to fight with, and let's be honest, they end up in the bin after a couple of flies. Remember though, although they're called hackle pliers, they can also be used for tying other materials, biots, stripped quills, thread, ribs, you name it. These are without a doubt on my desk all the time, and to me, a critical piece of kit. Now at shows, tying evenings, or online Zoom demos, for example, there's always one guy who's adamant that all you need to perform a whip finish is your fingers. Of course, he's not wrong, but I'd argue he's not necessarily correct either. Again, we're talking about tools for a specific job. I'm pretty happy to whip finish with my fingers if I need to, but if I'm going down to silly sizes, and yes, I use a lot of small flies, a whip finish tool costing a couple of pounds can make the job quicker, easier, more efficient, and gives us more surgical control when we need it. So I like the rotary style whip finish tool. Since I was a kid, I never really got on with those springy whip finish tool things. They drove me crazy and I just never got on with them at all. Instead, I use these rotary whip finish tools. They're fantastic for the job and again, give us that surgical precision when we're creating small heads and we're whip finishing off. Now, if you don't tie hair wings, you can probably skip this section altogether. Use the chapters below, skip ahead. Now, some of you may know I love caddis. I love caddis. I love caddis. And at certain times of year on the rivers I fish, they can be everywhere. So because of that, I use a lot of deer hair. I also incorporate deer hair into cripples and other patterns. And like all these patterns, I like to stack my deer hair using one of these things, a hair stacker. I like to stack my deer hair so that they look nice and consistent. Does it matter to the fish? Probably not. Does it make my patterns look all nice and pretty? It absolutely does. Would my customers be happy if they received a batch of potentially messy looking flies? No, they wouldn't. So much like the whip finish tool, each to their own. I'm lucky enough to know the fly tying genius that is Kevin Muir. Kevin actually turns his own wood and makes these awesome hair stackers. So thanks to Kevin, I have one of his beautiful hair stackers, and not only does it look wonderful on my tying desk, but it also does a truly fantastic job. Again, if you want to buy these from any sort of shop, they're generally pretty cheap. I like the wood ones, they look nice. It does sometimes build up a little bit of static, but they're fantastic. Again, tool for the job. Moving on then, let's talk about needles or bodkins. Thanks to both Kevin Muir again and John Williams, I'm lucky enough to have some custom-made bodkins. But if you're going to buy these from the shops, again, a couple of quid. I use bodkins a lot for anything from splitting thread, picking out dubbings, separating materials, and more. For a tiny amount of money, these things are priceless. Can I just use a sewing needle? Yeah, of course you can. Glue it to a pencil and you've got an even better tool. But if you want one made for fly tying, they're very cheap. So I think Kevin's gonna start to blush soon. Thanks, Kev. Kevin's dubbing brush is not one that I saw on the market before I got my hands on this thing. This thing is brilliant. It allows you to really get in on the action. And instead of a long horizontal brush that you would rub underneath the thorax, this actually allows you to get up into thoraxes, bodies, whatever it is that you're trying to maybe rough up or pick out. This thing is just phenomenal. Such a great idea. Well done, Kev. So as always, there's a host of options out there. If you can try and get your hands on these tools, try and play around with them, friends, clubs, whatever that might be. Again, bodkins, brushes, hair stackers, another tool in the toolbox for when you need it. So we've talked about material storage, but how do you store your precious scissors, the bodkins, the needles, all of those other tools that might be more sensitive and need a little bit of extra care? So let's talk about this thing, the tool caddy. So this is a Renzetti tool caddy, and I think it was about a tenner when I bought it a long time ago. It lives on my desk and stores and protects my tying tools when I aren't using them. The great thing about that is the foam design. It keeps my tools protected, especially if the tips of my bobbin holders and scissors, and keeps everything neat, tidy, and safe. Of course, you could keep your tools in a drawer or a box, but this thing allows me quick and easy access when I need a tool, and when I don't, it's stored safely. Is this a critical piece of kit? No, but I'd argue that storing your tools correctly is critical. As I mentioned earlier, my bobbin holders are more than 10 years old and they're pretty much like new because I treat them well. Lastly then, let's get to the vice. Now this is probably the biggest area where bad advice or a bad vice can impact how you either enjoy or not enjoy fly tying. Like most tools, a vice is designed to do one thing and one thing really, really well. Some vices might be designed to hold big hooks, others small hooks, and then some a combination in between. There are also many opinions out there, and like any tool, fly rod, car, or beer, everyone has their own preference. Get to the point, stop being so vague. Well, there's simply no one vice for everybody. It's that simple. If you're new to fly tying, I would probably advise that you try as many different vices as you can before spending your hard-earned cash. Fly tying clubs are perfect for this. If you're in the UK, you can check out the Fly Dressers Guild. I'll pop a link in the description below. Or if any of the fishing clubs that you belong to have their own fly tying clubs, then have a chat with them first. Us fishing folk are generally a pretty nice bunch and generally very eager to help. Okay, so I've tied with a few vices over the years. I've also tied so many flies. So I continue to tie because I enjoy tying, and these things make the job a lot easier and more fun. Now I'll get to the point. I like simple, and for the past 8 years I've used a vice that's simple to use, pretty much bomb-proof, and can hold the hooks that I needed to use securely and with zero slippage. The Regal Medallion with the stainless steel jaws is a pretty solid platform for tying. I love its simple open and close system, and it will happily hold any hook I throw at it, even the 32s when I need to tie them or I'm asked to. So I like to set mine up fairly high. You can see it's not down low, it's fairly high. Don't want to hunch over the vice. I do that enough with a keyboarding work. Back to what I said earlier, this is mine. I paid for it with my own money, and this isn't endorsed in any way. In fact, if this broke today, I would buy another one tomorrow without hesitation. Regardless of the brand of vice or tool that you use, having a proper tool for the job makes tying much easier and much more enjoyable. The key is to ensure that the hook stays exactly where you expect it to stay. So shop around, ask around, reach out to those fly tying clubs and the Fly Dressers Guild, and they will help you out. If you're stuck or in a bind, again, reach out to me if you think I can help, and we'll have a chat. So that was my setup, but remember, everything in this video has been totally subjective. What works for me might not work for you, and vice versa. And again, that's totally cool. So most importantly, if you're new to fly dressing or looking to upgrade, try and get your hands on these tools before you buy. And again, if you've got any recommendations, please use the comments below. Let me know, it'll help me, and of course it'll help the rest of the community. Also, if you've got any other queries, feel free to use the comment section below or reach out to me via my website. Lastly, and again, if you've enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up. You might want to consider subscribing to the channel as well, and then you'll be notified each time I make a new video. Until next time, happy tying, yakida, and I'll see you soon.